Hi, my name's Tony Ridley and welcome to another Crisis Leadership Management Education tutorial. In this session we're going to be talking about the roles and responsibilities and how teams and formed bodies and departments can work more efficiently, more effectively together to get the required desired and superior results. So the first thing to make very important is that it's not a matter of geography, it's not a physical presence. Crisis management, leadership and teams don't have to necessarily be physically co-located, and increasingly in the electronic world with international operations it is a convergence of disciplines and roles and responsibilities rather than physical geography. So just bear that in mind, that what I'm talking about in terms of the leadership, the contribution and so on is not bound by any geography statutes. So when we talk about crisis management teams, in a perfect world and an overall process, there are several key fundamental representatives in the process. And they range from chief executive, business continuity, human resources, finance and so on, to security risk management. But in this particular element, what we'll be talking about is the chief executive, unit head, or the head of the business and or department or crisis in itself, those that are chairing, leading and guiding. Now it's important to note in particular with this process or requirement, when we're talking about the contribution or the elements when it relates to a chief executive, they may well fulfill the crisis management team lead role, but they may not act as the leader. Now what I mean by that is that leadership is required in many forms. For example, there may be a television appearance requirement. Well, not all CEOs are either conditioned or skilled or have the right personality, temperament and so on. There may be some technical liaison required and a whole bunch of other things that may be the assumption of leadership, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be fulfilled by the CEO. So whilst they are the functional head, the actual leadership vision and outward strategy and planning may not come from this job function. So it's important to remember that, even though they typically are and should be charged with the overall results and direction in which the crisis and the teams are headed. They should be instrumental, or they should be engaged in the initial assessment, particularly as it escalates. 9 times out of 10 crisis does not get activated or triggered at the appropriate time, and it's simply not the senior leadership that triggers a crisis. It can start with a receptionist, it can start with a janitor, it can start with a frontline manager or employee that identifies the need to report up, which is then when it officially becomes categorized or qualified as a crisis. So they should, in the initial stages, be working with a crisis coordinator, who is the sense of governance for the team, to determine what the depth and impact and courses of action available are. They should also be part and parcel responsible for either the decision or the authority for the activation of services, provisions, reserves, financial capital, internal, external approvals, so on and so forth. They provide the leadership, as I earlier mentioned. However, it's not so much necessarily specific to the crisis. They provide leadership to the team as a whole, and they may acquiesce or stand down and take a subordinate role in certain technical natures, or within the group there may be a superior leader on a day-by-day basis, or there may be someone more appropriate in these particular circumstances. They provide the overall command and authority for the internal resources available, because otherwise they're simply not a functional head, and if your chief executive or your head of the crisis team is unable to make those decisions, then quite frankly they should not be the head of that team. They require the appropriate decision making and authority required. They'll also do the liaison between internal and external crisis managements or on-site crisis management teams, internal, external, up, down, sideways, whatever your terms of reference are. They will be the representative element. Now, when I say corporate spokesperson, this typically first and foremost relates internally. The external process is highly dependent on organisation structures, cultures, terms, policies, procedures and so on. However, they represent the group, and in particular the vision, the outcomes. They may not be the communicator or the orator of the facts and the events and the decisions and the cycles and so on. That may fall to corporate affairs or someone else. However, they are the spokesperson for the group, unless again it's identified that there is a more pertinent or competent or available individual for that. And last but certainly not least, they should be leading the risk assessment and contingency planning. So considering all the facts, and it should be evidence-based or it should be foreseeable risk-based, where they collect and collate and sit over all of the known details and the forecasted details. They make consideration, they take advice from pertinent individuals, and then they are responsible for either leading or selecting those courses of action in accordance, again, with all of the other contingent plans and guidelines and so on. But essentially, so the expression goes, the buck stops here. That's exactly what this particular functional head should be. And now this should be cleared and communicated to all other functioning team members, so as they're clear in their roles, but they're also very, very clear in terms of at what stage they need to seek approval, authority, input, and certainly who's finally responsible for certain elements. So once again, thanks very much for joining us. That concludes this particular section. For further education tutorials on this subject, please visit www.crisismanagement.tony-ridley.com, and that's all for now. Thanks very much. Bye.